Hello, and welcome to another episode of Goblin Lore. In this episode, we talk to Sam Tang of Kitchen Table Magic about what it means to be part of the magic community, what it means to talk to a bunch of the people in the magic community, and how Sam helps foster that community through his investigations into people and how they contribute or how they've detracted from the community. This episode touches on somewhat controversial personalities and somewhat controversial topics in the community of magic, but we feel like this is important, that these were important discussions to have, and that we and Sam handled them as carefully and delicately as possible. Know that all of this discussion does come from a place of compassion for the community, of investigation into what is important and what makes us strong and caring and empathetic. As always, at the end of this episode, we do bring things together with some actionable advice at how we can make our community better, how we can help root out some of the darkness within it, and how we can be voices for good and educated and aware and compassionate players. So, with all that out of the way, let's get to the show.
Hello, Podwalkers, and welcome to another episode of Goblin Lore. In today's episode, we're talking about teams and magic lore, how each person in those teams have different strengths and roles in their group, and how that relates to the real-world magic community as a whole. And we have a special guest with us to help do that. Sam, can you introduce yourself and tell our listeners where to find you on the internet?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Tang, host of Kitchen Table Magic, a podcast that interviews people from the magic community. You can find me on Twitter at SamoTango, and you can also find the show at kitchentablemagic.org. In addition to doing Kitchen Table Magic, I also have a YouTube channel called Play MTG, where I will, in the near future, be uploading a whole bunch of videos. I've also done collaborative projects with Card Kingdom, as well as Paragon City Games, as well as Vintage Magic. I've done documentaries for them, pre-release videos for them. I've also done coverage for Team Metagame Gurus, and I've also been a host on a couple of live streaming events, such as The Gauntlet, which is a charity event that Card Kingdom and Mox Boarding House puts on. And I also was recently the host of Card Kingdom's local game show that was streamed on Twitch.
Very happy to have you, Sam. Glad you came to join us. On our cast, we like to start off with a fun question that generally relates to our topic. So if you don't mind going first, which magic characters would you want to start a brand new podcast with?
I think this is just a lovely question. So the obvious answers are out. I want nothing to do with Jace or Liliana. They're such drama queens. I'm so over them. So I really thought about this one. I really want to have Vraska as a podcast co-host, because when you think about it, all right, she's very intelligent, she's very capable, she runs an entire guild, she's also a planeswalker, she's also very powerful, and she's also like a really cool person. She was like a pirate and also a guild master, and she like lurks in the shadows, and she's like also not judgy because she's like will deal with fungus and rotting things and zombies and really gross stuff. Like she's super inclusive, right? I also think that she has a really wonderful background. You know, she was locked up in prison, wrongly persecuted, tortured, all this stuff, right? And she's also just like she also displays such leadership qualities, because being the captain of your own pirate ship just seems just like a ridiculous management endeavor on its own, right? And she also seems like she really can kick ass because she knows how to fire a gun and how to like use a sword and how to just turn people into stone and kill people and stuff like that. So I think that would be really awesome. So Vraska is very high on my list of just a super cool person to have. The next person is more of a practical choice, and I think that's Teferi, because he can control time. And when you're on a podcast and you need to roll back time, I mean, this is kind of Harry Potter time turner stuff, but being able to have Teferi be able to be like, okay, I got that, and kind of like turn it back, I think that's also very useful. And he's like, survived for a very long periods of time with his time magic. And so I think he's also very insightful, also very patient, also very intelligent. And last, my third co-host, I think is going to be more controversial, and I think that's going to be Nicol Bolas, because he's such a jerk, but he's also super powerful, hyper intelligent. He's a very careful planner, and he's always going to play the devil's advocate. He's always going to be going counter to what you're trying to say. He'd probably argue with you a lot. But he would also have very insightful things to talk about.
I am HobbsQ. I can be found on Twitter at HobbsQ. I didn't actually have Bolas on my list for this. because I just think that him and I would clash too much as very large personalities. I went with kind of an interesting pick for my first co-host would be Tamio. And I think that that's just because, especially the field researcher, I think that Tamio and I would really get along in terms of our interest in psychology, sociology, kind of those different elements of that. I think like her and I could have great intellectual conversations, but also be able to make it fun. And I think that how we make it fun is making sure that we kind of are breaking the concepts down, like I hope that Goblin Lore podcast does, so that everybody can understand concepts that might be a little bit heavier or a little bit more difficult or bigger. And for that reason, our third co-host would be Squee, because we got to make sure that he understands what we're talking about. So it would be our good barometer. And actually, similar to what Sam was saying, I have Squee on here because he has been around for a very, very long time. And I don't think we get enough in the story of what Squee has seen. I mean, even when we return to Dominaria, I don't think there was enough focus on, you guys, Squee is still alive. Like, he's not a planeswalker. He hasn't been dead, though, and, like, really large amounts of time have passed, and he's still alive. I think he would be very, very fascinating, but we just might also have to... It's kind of like having Joe on this cast. Alex and I have to really treat him as our Squee.
I think I'm going to take that as a compliment.
Just like Squee would.
I'm Joe Redeman, and I can be found on Twitter at Fyndhorn. That's Fynd Horn. And I kind of approached this question like a typical sports broadcast team. That's kind of what I thought about. You know, the classic Monday Night Football team of like Mike Tirico and John Gruden, where you have the very straight-laced, you know, play-by-play caller with Tirico, and then you have the total wild card who you don't really know what to expect is going to come out of his mouth with John Gruden. I thought that was always a fun thing. And so I approached this sort of in a similar way. This is how I assembled my team. Is I wanted a straight-laced person to keep us on track, and then a wild card. So I actually went with something kind of on theme for this episode, and I put together Wrath Capation and Slimefoot the Stowaway. Wrath... Raph is obviously our play-by-play commentator. As, you know, sort of these fresh eyes to the world, he's exploring everything, and he's just sort of like, you know, trying to document and see it all and sort of understand the world and categorize it. And Slimefoot, we have no idea what he's thinking at any given moment, and it's so great. It might not be the best duo for an audio medium now that that's coming out of my mouth, but I still want it to happen.
Yeah, because I'm not sure Slimefoot can speak, but you know, technology and things, we can work something out. I'm Alex Newman. I'm found on Twitter at Alexander Newm, and my answer actually dovetails nicely from Joe's. So I was just trying to figure out, to start with, someone that I think would be fun to have a conversation with. So I actually went with Tiana from Dominaria and the new Weatherlight crew, because she's just got this like innocent passion about everything and just really excited about the things that she's doing. And I think that would make a really great podcaster to talk about whatever it is our cast would be about. And kind of rolling from there, I think that Saheeli Rai from Kaladesh would be a fun addition, because kind of how I'm picturing it, Saheeli would be talking about some ludicrous technology thing, and Tiana would get really excited, then Saheeli would explain it to Tiana, then Tiana could dumb it down even more to explain it to me, and hopefully our listeners. Well, with that out of the way, let's move on to the story topic. Talk about some teams in Magic lore. So we got... So I'll just start with the Weatherlight crew, but not the Weatherlight Joe and I were talking about. I think we go back and start with the original Weatherlight.
OG Weatherlight.
Yes, the OG Weatherlight, which oddly enough started with the first set, Weatherlight, back in the mid-90s, ran through the invasion block of Apocalypse, and was this long storyline that was really the first big storyline that Magic told. And it was talking about the crew of this ship, this flying ship called the Weatherlight, that collected the legacy on Dominaria and went to some other planes to fight the influence of Phyrexia, preparing for the invasion during the invasion block. So this crew really is a hodgepodge, but I think that's one of the reasons that they did so well. I'll start with Gerrard. I believe it's Capation. He was the Master of Arms. Like literally, the first card depicting him was called Master of Arms. It wasn't a legend, but kind of a Benelish hero. He was also the heir to the Legacy, which was this collection of artifacts that Urza collected, sort of hoarders style, is my theory at least, to fight Phyrexia. And there's a lot about Urza, and I don't want to go too deep because I think that's going to be an episode of ours. But
summary: Urza's the worst.
He is the worst, but at the same time, he managed to save Nominaria. It's a complex thing, but Gerrard is described as the commander, and he's definitely the person who knew how to lead from the front in a fighting situation. But Sisay, Captain Sisay, really is the one who was the leader of the group. She's the one who pulled them all together. Her eventual capture is what got Gerrard back to the group. He left when his friend Rofelos was... Rofelos? That's probably not how you pronounce it.
Rofelos is how I've known it.
There you go. Rofelos. His friend Rofelos died. He left along with Miri. And Sisay's capture brought him back, and they went and got her on Wrath, and then it's really her drive that even put this group of people together in the first place. Then we've got Hannah, who has a lot of training with artifacts. She trained in I believe Soldevi area. She really helped them to understand and use the Legacy because, like I said, it was kind of a collection of junk. I mean, a lot of it was powerful, but it was just the most arbitrary collection of things.
She's actually the daughter of Urza's best friend, Baron, the wizard.
So speaking of Baron, we have not Baron, but a wizard from the Tolarian Academy, Urtai, that Baron sent along with because he wasn't able to come himself when they needed a wizard to help work the core. Urtai also has some details to his story. Things didn't go so well for him, but he went along with them for a while, and then Wrath went poorly for him. We got an Orm. She's a Semite healer. She was the physical healer for the group, and she also mediated a lot of conflict. She was the one who helped convince Tongarth, who is the next character, to help to get Gerrard and to give Gerrard a chance when they were going out to rescue Sisay. And she really was the glue that helped to keep them together. Tongarth is a Minotaur, which is a lot of fun. I think one of the only named Minotaur characters in the game until we got to Angrath. So it was pretty cool. I liked having that diversity of characters because we've also got our boy Squee was in the group.
Yeah,
had a Goblin as part of this. It's rare that you see goblins being cast in the roles of heroes, and so it was a lot of fun to have this goblin show up in the crew. And I kind of describe his abilities or his superpower as being underestimated. It seemed like every villain underestimated Squee's capabilities, and then Squee turned around and saved the crew or killed the villain or just somehow saved the day.
Yeah, and that's another thing too, is Squee is the only character still alive in the timeline right now, aside from Karn from this original Weatherlight crew.
And Karn, as you're saying, Planeswalker, he's been showing up in the story lately. He also was a part of the crew. I really liked his story because he's a big golem. He's a big bruiser, but he was actually a pacifist for most of the storyline because of some fight that he was kind of pushed into, and he discovered that he was maybe too good at fighting, and just it traumatized him, and he just decided from now on, I'm not going to hurt another living thing. But he was still a part of their crew. He still helped them. He was integral to them getting the legacy back when they went to Wrath, and it was taken by the Volrath, who was the the general for Phyrexia on that planet. So even with being unable to fight in a storyline that's kind of about conflict and invasion, he found places to help. I think that's kind of the crew.
Just last but not least, you mentioned Miri, but Miri was one of Gerrard's childhood friends, and when Gerrard went and trained in Yavimaya under the Maro sorcerer Multani, they were hanging out. They became best friends. It was like those two and Raphaelos the elf that were all super close until Raphaelos died, and et cetera, et cetera. So Miri is like, she's a cat warrior also, I should say. And again, a little more diversity in this group, which is super cool.
All of the members of the Weatherlight ended up doing something significant somewhere. You've got, even, I think in the second book, the ship was either the ship wasn't destroyed, but a bunch of people ended up leaving the ship. But even the people who left the ship ended up in the middle of the battle somewhere.
I think they were sculpted after sort of traditional Dungeons and Dragons adventuring parties. I mean, if you think about it, you've got the wizard in Urtai. You've got the tank in Tongarth. You've got the commander in Gerrard. You've got the duelist or the fighter in Sisay. You've got a healer in Orem. You've got an engineer or an artificer sort of thing in Karn. You've got Squee, who's there for comedic relief because you always need that. But you have this composition of all these different characters who fill complementary roles to each other. And I think that's very intentional, that it was similar to some of those adventuring parties type of things. But now we're, like you're saying, we're seeing that complexify. I don't think complexify is a word, but we're seeing it complexify with our Gatewatch characters evolving and having to face those questions about their identities. Is Gideon really just mono white? Is Liliana going to take on something other than selfishness at some point? We have already seen Nissa dip her toe into blue. I don't think it'd be beyond the realm of possibility to see these characters spread their ideological wings a little bit in the near future.
I think it'd be interesting to see them go into other colors, but at the same time, I like that they haven't, not all of them, at least Liliana and Gideon, because it does show that there's more than a single note to each color in the color pie. And that I know it was a Twitter thing a little while ago where people were showing the 5 colors and how much the mix of with them personally, and it's like most people have a little bit of everything, or at least some. And I think it's the same thing with these characters. Gideon's mono white, not because he's only white, but because he's like 80% white. But he's got these other elements, and that mixture can change a little bit over time. I know myself dealing with some of my mental health things. I have social anxiety, and it's a thing that I've been working on. And my outgoingness, it's a thing that I've always been relatively outgoing. I didn't really get to exercise it much years ago, but I'm seeing myself be more and more outgoing as the years go in, because that sort of as I sort of change what I do and how I do it, my personality mixture's shifting a little bit. And so I like to see these characters doing the same thing.
And you might be able to say too, I mean, if you think about, I think about this a lot with what do I bring to a friend group, or what do I bring to a community, or what do I bring to a relationship? I think it's nice that there is, or specifically even this podcast, it's nice that there are these balances of personality in these groups that we see in these teams, that you have this sort of shifting happening to kind of to accommodate each other's transitions, each other's own shifting things. So Liliana is becoming a little more kind and opening, but Gideon is finally taking that moment now to stop being, protector dad and start figuring out what's going on with himself. You know what I mean? That same sort of thing where you are, maybe Alex, you're pushing out more into your social world. And so that might allow, other people in your friend group to sort of go, okay, I don't have to organize all the events all the time. I can now take a little bit of time just to be, you know what I mean? That sort of shifting weight, I guess. That's kind of, to me, the composition of what a good team is.
I've also been very curious about where these characters are on their journey as they come from an origin story that we've learned about recently and how that develops and how that changes them, right? With the set Magic Origins, we've learned of all these backstories for all of these planeswalkers and how they became, kind of who they are today, especially with even like Kaladesh block. We went back and found Chandra's parents, things like that. It's surprising to me because when I first learned of the backstories for these planeswalkers, they all started off in a very different place and they weren't where they were now. I mean, Jace used to be like a bad guy and it was like not entirely clear if like what Jace's I guess motivations were. And like before you're just like, oh, Liliana is just like some heartless, cold, calculating person that doesn't care about anyone but themselves. And I think that in the storyline where in the card in Bolas's clutches, when you see Liliana's contract defaults and goes to Bolas, the look on her face and that expression, she feels a tremendous regret. Like she just really screwed up and she doesn't want to tell anyone that she's actually really scared and she's actually really concerned for herself. And it's just like, and it's also really strange. It's like Nissa. Like Nissa burst onto the scene as a new character back in the day, and it's just like Nissa is like the defender. She's very, I guess, rooted. Like she's like green. She's very rooted in her beliefs, and she very much knows what she needs to do to save Zendikar. And like Zendikar was screwed, and Zendikar still sort of is screwed, and needs a lot of like recovery and rebuilding. But then just for Nissa to just like turn around and just like leave the Gatewatch, I thought was very surprising. And I kind of at first like didn't understand that. Like she's like, I can't do this, and sheds a tear and leaves. It's just like, what? like really? You're just gonna bail out now? Like this other demon is just another demon in this whole grand tapestry of all these like RPG things that the crew has to do. And it's just like you're just like, I'm out, I'm done. I'm pissed off, I'm leaving. And so it's just very odd, right? And earlier you guys were talking about how Gideon looks inward and has begun to think about his own life. It's like, Gideon had an incredibly tragic childhood, and had like all of his friends murdered because of his own hubris. And it's like, he's got some major PTSD there that I'm concerned about that when that comes out. And I would also not be so surprised if Bolas were to exploit that. You were also talking about how each of the planeswalkers has these different percentages of different colors, and I would be very interested in seeing a color shifted version of all of these planeswalkers, right? Like Liliana started off as a healer and just wanted to save her brother. What if we get a one white version of Liliana where she heals things and makes things pretty awesome and makes things indestructible? And then
Player
you get
chaos too.
Right, yeah, why not, right? And then
I would love it. Oh god,
and then you get like this 2 black version of Gideon when Gideon's just like really fed up and just wants to kill everything, just like Gerrard does. You know what I mean? And it's like that is what very much kind of makes me wonder. It's just like, where is the journey? Where is the arc? Where are we right now about these characters developing? And we have had Gatewatch fatigue in the past. And like they're like, okay, too much Gatewatch fatigue. Let's change the storyline. And so I'm not really sure if the story that we're seeing is a byproduct of business and Gatewatch fatigue, and it being like Wizards being super meta about the storyline of Magic, or this is actually where the characters are going, and we just don't see the arc of the story because they plan out the story maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 years in advance.
So we're talking about teams, we're talking about assembling groups of people of varying strengths and abilities and backgrounds and experiences. And so the idea that you brought to us, Alex, with this episode, and the reason why you're here with us today, Sam, is, you do this with your podcast, with Kitchen Table. So could you talk to us a little bit about what you do and why you do it? I mean, why is it so important to build up the community of Magic and talk to all these people about their roles in this?
It's so important to share different voices from the community. And I think the reason why is because if you just kind of are in the community and you just kind of don't look around and you don't talk to people and you don't kind of see what's out there, the community is skewed. It's only based on what you can observe or what you experience or what you see and hear. And that's not necessarily an accurate representation of the entire community. If you really wanted to go out and look for every single one of those millions of Magic players and tell every single one of their stories, you would find an incredibly diverse and varied. You'd have a lot of extremes. And then you'd also find that it was absolutely huge. So in this journey of kitchen table magic, the first thing I wanted to do was just to talk to people. I started the podcast because I felt that I started to feel a disconnection with the community, and that kind of scared me a little bit. So I said, well, if I'm having a disconnection, I need to get back into it, but I can't get back into it just by playing more Magic or grinding more pre-TQs. Like, that's not really what Magic is about, right? Magic often is said is a universal language. As long as you sit down with someone, even though you don't speak the same language or you have different skill levels, the fact that you can play this game that has the same rules universe and same rules engine with, you can form friendships. And that's absolutely true. The fact that we're on this podcast talking right now, we've never met before, but we're connected through the game of Magic. You can go to your FNM or go to an upcoming pre-release or go to a GP and play in a side event. And the fact that you're sitting across the table from someone else who's also playing Magic, you instantly feel a connection and a camaraderie, and you're having a shared experience with that person. And so talking with people about Magic really brings out what the best parts of Magic are. So I've interviewed pros, and we all love people who are very good at what they do. So the pros are very good at this game, so it's we're very awe-inspired. But we also find that in addition to them just being really good at things, they've also sacrificed a lot in their life to get to where they are. And that's one thing that I think is something that we don't think about, is to be really good at a game, to get a lot of respect and to get a lot of achievement in something, you have to sacrifice. And so that's an aspect of the pro community that we don't see very often and we don't talk about very often. And so when you listen to every single one of the episodes of Kitchen Table Magic that has interviewed a pro, you hear a lot of stories of sacrifice. You hear a lot of stories of being like, wow, I lost, and there's a drive, there's a hunger, there's a chase, Brian Brown-Dewan, at one point when he was grinding his way to becoming world champion, he had all of his possessions just carrying around in like a big plastic garbage bag, right? And he was crashing on people's couches, and he was just doing any job he can in Roanoke at SCG, Star City Games, to just get by. And he, at many times in his life, he was just like, am I going to make it? He just never knew whether or not he was going to make it. Right? Jerry Thompson talked about how he's gone through such a transformation in his early life, being very much like, I have to win and only winning matters, to now when he's like, no, it's not about winning. Like, winning is just what happens when you're good at Magic, but being a part of the Magic community is a journey. And so today, he very much cares about philanthropy, donating his winnings and donating his money to certain things. He cares very much about making great content. He cares very much about writing and teaching people. And it's kind of like those things that really make you think that there's a different facet of Magic. And then there's also another group of people that I talk to, which are pillars of the community members, content creators, people who mod, or people who, like the professor, do videos, or people who cosplay. And everyone in some way or another contributes to Magic the Gathering and contributes to the community. So going back to your question, this is like, what is it about community? Why go talk to people? Why is it important to be thinking about team and teamwork? And why is it important to think about people? Why is it more than just a game, a hobby, a lifestyle? What really is it when it comes to people? If you took all the people out of the Magic community, it would just be tables, chairs, tournament rooms, and cardboard. Like, it would not be interesting at all. But it's people's stories about how people help each other, how people have each other's backs, how people drive each other to places and share memories and laugh and have fun and win and lose and, whatever. It's those things that make the community worth being a part of, and also really worth, for me at least, telling a story about.
So, Sam, I'm really interested in kind of where you started with this whole thing, saying that, you kind of got this impression in some ways that the Magic community was losing some of these stories, because you kind of described what I think is echo chambers to a degree, that you noticed that maybe you were not getting as many of the viewpoints that you used to get, or that your world may have been narrowing in some ways, in a way that actually meant that you were missing out on entire swaths of our community. Is that kind
Yeah.
of what you're describing?
Yes, and you know what was really interesting is season 1, towards the end of season 1, I interviewed the Crackgate guy, Sid Blair. He was the guy who posed with all the butt cracks and got banned, and it was like a big deal, right? It was a big blow up. I talked to him, and I was really interested because I wanted to, talk to someone that, the community at large had characterized as a villain. And, what a bully, what a jerk, right? But really, when you look at those photos, you're like, well, he's also a overweight, neck-bearded guy, and he's also a nerdy guy, and he loves magic. And, really, who was he making fun of, right? Like, was he just posing for the sake of posing, or was he really trying to be malicious about it? And of course, we have to really separate the issue of PR, business optics, and community, bullying and community, like being mean to people. Well, a lot of people were offended. A lot of people were not happy about it. A lot of people were really embarrassed, right? And that was something that Sid felt horrible about. But from like the business standpoint of like, we ban this person because, we don't stand for this as a business, I think that's also a good thing. You want to set a precedent. It's like, no, we do not stand for people going to public events and like doing these things that create bad optics for the community. He was very shocked that he got banned, and he was really bummed out that he got banned. And and also there's a part of me that also kind of, after talking to him, I don't think he plays Magic anymore. And I think that event he just kind of fell off the Magic train, I don't know if he plays Magic anymore. I don't know if he's part of the community. And that kind of saddens me a little bit, because whereas he needed to have like that slap on the wrist, like, hey, like that's mean, don't do stuff like that, right? But it wasn't to the point where I think that it needed him to not play Magic anymore. And so I don't know, I definitely am not the person to hand down that judgment. I am definitely not the person to say what was right and what was wrong. But all I'm saying is I thought it was very interesting from my standpoint to find him, to track him down, to pitch and say, hey, can I talk to you? Can I interview you? And then listen to his story, and then be able to tell a story and see the arc and this journey of a person. And that, to me, was the most fascinating, because there were parts of the story, it's very complex again, and Sid also himself was like, I didn't think it was an issue, and then I realized it was really bad, and then I felt horrible, and then I got banned, and I was like, and then I came to terms with it, and I'm very sorry, and that's not who I am, and I love the Magic community. And even though he kind of came through that cycle, sadly, the end result is he's not playing Magic anymore. So I don't know really whether or not the punishment served its purpose, because there has never been another incident of people going to an event to specifically bully or shame or harm or harass people. That's just, that hasn't happened in the same analogous context, right? So that was really interesting to me, very eye-opening. And another interview that I had that really, I guess, speaks to this kind of community issue was my first episode, which I was very terrified of. It was very controversial. Season 1, episode 1, it was Travis Wu. And it was right coming off of his ban, right? And it was his original statements that he made on his Twitch stream. And, I had followed T Wu back in the day because I was like, wow, he's just like the premier brewer. He is the premier streamer. He gets like thousands of people to go on a stream. He's a very thoughtful player. He was Team Channel Fireball, all that stuff, and then he just like said these ridiculous things. And people did not like that. I didn't agree with it. I did not like that. I was kind of shocked about that. And when I wanted to talk to him about it, I wanted to talk to him just from the standpoint of like the arc of his life. And he had gone through, for himself, a pretty traumatic experience because he was like exiled from this community. And that's quite that's a lot of upheaval for someone who's had their identity and their social circles rooted in a very specific community to be like forcibly torn away from it. And he was very afraid to talk to me about it because he was like, Sam, like, no offense, but I don't want to drag this all up again. I don't want to have to deal with this again because it was like so many people came after me and I had to apologize to so many people. And he feels terrible about that. And he was like, that's not what I believe. I do not believe what I said. I was asking a question and I was trying to have a discussion based on a book that was written. And of course it did not go well. And of course it is, the internet, and there are just some things that you just don't want to have a particularly intellectual conversation about. And if you do, you don't necessarily have it on a Magic stream. It's just like one of those things, right? So he understood what he did. He understood the consequences. Travis completely accepted the consequences, and he worked through his banning. He left Magic, went and did something else, worked on a farm, and I got to know Travis a little bit. And the kind of person that he is that he's a real quirky, intellectual person, and he's a really smart person. And when you're really smart and kind of quirky, you kind of think about things on an orthogonal level. And he just also has no filter. He's like, if he has something that is really interesting and he wants to talk about it, he's going to want to talk about it, and he's going to ask a lot of whys. He's like, why did it happen like that? Why was it like that? Why was history like this? Why did people think this way? Why did other people think this way? Why was this book written the way it was? Like, I'm reading it, I have questions about it now. Some things I think, yeah, sure, I guess what they're saying makes sense. Oh, other things are just absolutely absurd. And so he was really asking those questions, and he had not formed, I guess, a cohesive and intelligent and robust understanding of it before talking about it. And of course, that went sideways. So, but and like for Tiwu, it was like he hit rock bottom and then bounced. Like the bouncing is what kind of surprised me, because he came back, started up his Facebook group, started up Magic content again, did really well at GP Portland, got back onto the Pro Tour. People were rooting for him, got back onto a team, and things were going well. And then the whole Facebook group thing happened again, and it was like, well, here we go. And so he really is like, wow, he was upset about it. He definitely is like, I don't agree with that either, but it already happened. And it's just like, that is also really interesting to me, because it's like, you messed up. I was just like, you messed up. Now I want to be in this group and say these things and feel like I'm protected by the anonymity of the internet. It's like, dude, it doesn't work that way. It's 2017, it's 2018. It doesn't work that way. You are one singular human being. What you say and what you do, that's what you believe, and that's what you say, and that's what you do. And it's like, do you kiss your mother with that same mouth? And it's like, to me, it's just like, for me, it's like, you're an adult. I have there's not an excuse for that. And you have to be mindful, and you have to of course, a bunch of people in Tiwu's group got banned, and they got really pissed. And Tiwu was like, oh my God, I gotta shut this thing down. And then he got banned. It's just like, yo, there are consequences, right? So, again, circling back to why this whole community thing matters, and why I decided to share stories about two very polarizing interviews that I had about people who really screwed up, and and then they were banned, and they didn't necessarily do good things for the community, and it's like, what does that have to do with community? Well, you look at what happened, right? The community at large decided, no, that's not who we want to be. That's not what we stand for. We are not okay with this, right? And so just like back in 1993, 1994, 1995, you have Mike Long, people who are cheating egregiously, and you've got Chris Bakula and company and Brian Weitzman that were fighting against it. No, we have to have integrity in the game. And back then there was a huge fight in the community about, hey, is cheating angle shooting? Or is it like basketball where you get a foul? Or no, we need to play the game very purely. This is about strategy. This isn't about edge cases, angle shooting, cheating, and Jedi mind tricks, and that kind of gray hat way to win something, right? Because it's a horrible feel-bad moment if you're a little kid and you didn't actually know the comprehensive rules and you got scummed by some 20-some-year-old Mike Long, and you're like, whoa, that's horrible, right? WotC doesn't want that, because it's right? And then you look at that, and it's very analogous to what's going on today, right? We do not want, the community at large does not want a hostile conversation, does not want a hostile group of people to push away and make other people feel unwelcomed based on their identity, based on their livelihood, based on their upbringing, based on who they are as people and who they choose to be. That's just exclusivity. Exclusivity is not good. Right. And I think that's going on everywhere in culture right now. And so the importance of community to be able to talk to each other, learn from each other, listen to each other. Right. And now to be clear here, I'm not saying we shouldn't judge each other. I'm not saying we shouldn't say, hey, don't do that. That's wrong. Yeah, you still need those aspects of social norming and policing and moderating. And we as a group of people have to be responsible for what we do and responsible to each other. But with reason, there has to be some amount of, we need to listen to other people kind of tell their story a little bit. Now, I say, with reason, because there are some people in the community that are no longer in the community who speak in a way that's just like they just talk, and they never want to listen. And listening to that kind of toxicity isn't productive at all, right? And so that's why it was like very interesting. It's like I've chosen very specifically not to talk to those kinds of people, but I've talked to people like Sid Blair and T-Woo. And, you know, a lot of people in the community are not even happy that I talked to T-Woo. They're like, that guy's dead to me. I don't like that guy. That guy's horrible. If I ever see him, I'm going to punch him in the face. And I can't believe you even talked to him and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, it's like, it's like serves as like a roadmap or like a stake, like a signpost in the ground as to this is where we've been and this is where we are and this is where the community is headed. And I think it does serve to guide the community as a whole about what our values are and what our commitments are as a group, because there isn't a rule book about what the Magic community needs to look like. You know, I mean, we're still working that out. And so it really is like the onus is really on the community members and on the content creators to do that.
And in a lot of ways, in a lot of places, that conversation helps us to figure that out. Like you're saying, talking to all those different people can help us define where we want to go and who we want to be.
Yeah. It's been very fascinating to, you know, just be part of the Magic community and to have your ear to the ground and really look closely at the values that different groups of people and what the stakeholders in the Magic community are. Because, you know, and I really attempted over my last 3 seasons to talk to as many different groups of people as possible. When you talk to the pros and you ask them what's important to you, they all talk about, well, we're working so hard to make this game a professional endeavor. We would like to be paid more, right? Like, who wouldn't want to be? Because if you're devoting, you know, 80 to 100 hours a week on a game, and you look at your colleague who's doing the same thing on Overwatch or Hearthstone or League of Legends or anything else, and they're being paid 10x what you're being paid, it's not a good feeling. And then you look at and then you talk to like the 12-year-old kid, you talk to the 16-year-old kid who is like scraping every single bit of their birthday and bar mitzvah money and like allowance money to buy packs and to buy cards because they want to play standard and they want to play modern, but they're like totally priced out by the 20 and 30-year-old and 40 and 50-year-olds who have like jobs and mortgages and savings and all this understanding of things. And like those little kids just get crushed in that sense, right? And then you look at the group of like content creators who love the game and sacrifice their time and their ability to play Magic to make content, and then like the whole, you know, bunch of baggage that goes with the community being like, you're a shill, you're an idiot, or what you're saying is horrible, I disagree with you, your content sucks. It's like that whole thing. And then of course there are streamers who get trolled, and of course there's the conversation about women in Magic. It's just like women are intelligent and competent, so they don't need to get any of the harassment. Like, it's just like, to me it's just like absurd, right? Like, to get that level of harassment. And it's just like ridiculous, right? And then you look at every single one of these groups of people, and of course there are more groups of people, artists as well. There's a lot of different groups within Magic. And you just like look at, there's like the push and pull. They all want the same thing, which is they all want to enjoy the game. They all want to pay homage to the game, right? People who want to play the game want to play the game well and pay respects to playing the game. Artists want to produce art for the game. Content creators want to talk about the game. Like, little kids just want to be deeper in the game and like surround themselves with the game, right? Pros just want to achieve the highest levels of recognition financially and from a community standpoint, you know, from a merit standpoint in the game. And Wizards just wants to sell more of this game and wants more people to play the game. And so really we're all aligned, you know? And that's one thing that I think is very difficult to discern, because like you get so wrapped up into certain things that when you pulling out and like really looking at it from like a 10,000 foot high up, like, you know, a perspective on it really then allows everyone to be like, well, everyone's really on the same side. So when I see some of the videos that are like on YouTube that are like a little tinfoil hatty, like, you know, Magic is dying or whatever, like, that's not them trying to destroy the game. They're super, super concerned. They're like sounding the alarm that this is what they observe and this is how they feel, and they're really scared. And so it's like this really weird, interesting thing that I've just been observing a lot. I've been observing a lot. I've been observing more than I've been like making content. I kind of kicked myself because I was like, wow, I really need to make more content.
I mean, I think we run into so a common thing that we talk a lot about on here is perspectives, and that's a word that you used actually in talking about that 10,000-foot viewpoint, and we talk about the binocular effect or kind of the microscope. But you can either kind of make things seem very far away or you can make them seem close in. But it's getting a step back and looking at it from those perspectives and trying to understand it. Even realizing at the end of the day, it does not mean that you agree with it. It doesn't have it just because you can understand where somebody is coming from, it does not mean that you think that you're on their side or that you're aligning with them. And I think there's times when we lose sight of that concept. People think that if you understand somebody that you are kind of, well, if you can understand them, then you're agreeing with them, versus having the ability to understand somebody's perspective and where they come from, or to understand it is a lot more nuanced than the black or white world that most of us feel comfortable in.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's just, yeah, you just the sheer act of just listening to another member in the community and understanding what subgroup that they are a part of, and just like listening to that and understanding that. Just listen. Just accept that is the life that they live, right? And, not to beat this dead horse, but like think about like a pro, right? From a pro standpoint, if they said, hey, if Wizards could just sell 4x playset of every single, new set that comes out, like MSRP $399.95 at whatever, I would literally just buy that and then play test and then go to the Pro Tour and then collect my prize and trophy and come home. Rinse and repeat. Right? But then when you look at Wizards, you're like, wait a second, then every LGS would be screwed. Like every LGS would be like, whoa, so I'm just going to sell this one, literally like this one box, and there's no guesswork, there's no like Magic would cease to be a collectible trading card game, right? So a whole bunch of people would be like, wow, that's a great idea. I'd love to do that. Like, I just want to play and be a spike. And then you look at little kids and you're like, whoa, I don't have $399. I've got $3.99. And it would be great to open that up and feel like, hey, gee, what am I going to get, right? And then if you go to like, okay, great, we're only going to cater to the little kids, and then it's just like, oh, so you mean then there's like this whole secondary market thing. It's just like, every different, like that's just like a really tiny example of just like all the conflicting perspectives from all these different subgroups of Magic players and the Magic community at large, and what it is to run a business about Magic. But when you really carefully look at both sides of the argument, there's nothing wrong about either side. It is just that's what both sides would like.
Just kind of bringing this back to lore and how that relates to the community. This idea that we were talking about before of how the community works as a group to define itself and what it wants to be is something that I really kind of wanted to pick your brain a bit more about, Sam. So especially as it relates to kind of what we want out of the game, with so many different voices, different backgrounds, different purposes for being a part of this game and a part of this community with different abilities, all of this stuff. How do we define things with a united voice? How do we say as a group, this is the thing that we want to see in Magic? Or, is that even possible to have a united voice? And I guess this is a separate question, but it's still tied in. It's important to me is, you talked a bit about those experiences you've had with some people who've been at odds with the greater part of the community in their tactics of expressing their love for the game. But how do we get those voices that care about the game but are expressing it in those divisive or harmful ways? It's not what they're saying, but how they're saying it, I guess, is the issue. How do we get those people to unite with the greater good? How do we get them to come into this whole with us?
I think that there are two things that people can do and that they have to understand is that if you are in the Magic community, or if you're kind of really a participant in any community, the first thing is that you have to understand that you matter. As a human being on this earth, with the singularity of technology and the internet, it's globalized and it's connected to everyone very seamlessly and very easily through many different kinds of social networks. So the ability for us to communicate with any one of us on the planet is growing at a very fast rate. So first, you have to understand that you matter and that you belong, regardless if you believe that or not. So it's often like a lot of times when you look at election cycles, like people get sad and they don't want to vote. And it's like, okay, you don't have to vote, but the fact is that you still are a citizen of a country, or you live in this country, and that you voting can affect the outcome. You not voting also can affect the outcome, right? And so when you are in, I don't expect every single Magic player to get onto Twitter and to tweet all their, it's a scary place. Some people just don't even want to talk about certain things. They have opinions, they have thoughts, and if they are in the conversation, they will have a feeling of things, but they don't necessarily want to share them. They don't necessarily want to start a podcast, or you know what I mean? So
Right.
They want to be lurkers. There's nothing wrong with that. But just know that you matter, first of all, and second is that you have a choice. Regardless of whether you're going to exercise that choice, you have one by default. Just by existing, you have one by default. So you get to choose whether or not you buy that product that Wizards releases or doesn't, or don't buy it, because it'll affect their KPI whether you like it or not, because it's going to affect it. And then also, if someone does something in the community and you really, they go to a GP, they do something horrible, you totally disagree with it, and you say nothing. The people that were harmed by that action don't get to hear your support, don't get to hear the consensus of the community that says, no, we don't want that, right? Or if you are like, yeah, I don't like that person and I think that harmful thing was right, and then you kind of are like, rah, like, F those people or whatever, and you're part of like the dissenting voice, then, and again, it's a choice. It's like, then what you're doing is actively going to harm or alienate or push certain people or cause tensions, or, again, it's a choice. So those are the two biggest things. It's like people just feel like they just don't matter. People just feel like they don't belong. People just don't feel like they don't even, like, their voice isn't important. Their voice isn't heard. It's like, it is. Like the professor reads every single comment in his videos. So one person, even though they don't even have their YouTube profile photo set or whatever, and it's like, oh, I really like that. Like the prof is going to read that and be like, oh, this person liked it. Or, oh, I like, for example, on Reddit, like everyone's like, oh, Magic Reddit is such a horrible place or whatever. People have a very strong opinion about it, and even I do, and I've voiced that opinion very strongly. I try to interact on Reddit, right? And then I always click on the new tab, and people post stuff, and they get like a whole bunch of downvotes or whatever. There was this person who said that I had my deck in my backpack, and I was walking home, and suddenly there was a massive rainstorm. I get home, I open up my deck box, my entire deck is soaked through, ruined. I'm devastated because this is my only deck. What do I do? Do I just quit? Like, this is a significant blow to me. And so I saw that and I wrote and I said, you know what you should do? You should let them all dry, iron them all out, have them be ugly, but have them be flat and not curled, put them in new sleeves, and continue to play with them. Yeah, the ink is all messed up. Yeah, the papers are they're basically severely damaged as of this point. But as long as they're flat, they're shuffleable, they are not constituted by a judge as marked cards, I encourage you to continue to play. And if people give you flack about it, explain to them what happened and explain that you love the game and you're going to continue to play the game. And that is the kind of support that I would like people to kind of think about. It's like, first of all, the person that happened to them, they made a choice. They say, I'm going to ask. And then me reading it made a choice. This is, that person doesn't matter. No, I said that person does matter. I'm going to tell that person that I want them to stay in the community. And I hope that that person did stay in the community. I hope that that person does continue to play Magic. Okay, these are gray hat tactics that everyone should be using, because this is just the mechanical process of Reddit and social media, right? So here's another actionable item. You want to speak out, you want to say things, you want to do things, but you just kind of feel like you don't want to use your real name to do it. Make up a fake name. That's what the internet is for. But now that you have this barrier of anonymity, you still can choose not to be a jerk. You still choose not to be toxic and horrible. You can be exactly the opposite, like an anti-troll. You could be totally anonymous and totally positive and totally awesome and totally supportive of other people. right?
I like
Nothing
the
on
idea of
Reddit.
anti-troll. That's good.
Yeah, nothing on Reddit is stopping you from getting onto Reddit, getting some random, random username. I can't think of one right now. Just some random username with a bunch of letters and numbers.
Q, 5572.
Yeah,
For
exactly,
instance.
right? Right, exactly, right? Seance Guy 1415, right? Just get on there and make up a thing, right? Not Morrow or something, and just post on Reddit. And as long as you're within the rules of the forum, and as long as you're being constructive, and as long as you're being positive, and as long as you're forwarding the action, no one's going to ban you. But then you get to counteract a Russian bot. You get to counteract a poop poster. You get to counteract a troll. You just get to counteract one other person who's downvoting every little kid's post and saying get good, uninstall, whatever. You get to do your piece, right? And you don't get to have any harm. You can have a throwaway password. You can have throwaway. These are gray hat tactics, right? They're kind of not the best, but they're also kind of legal. They kind of work, and you can kind of do that, But it just takes time.
I like the idea of gray hats for positivity.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like Bob Ross angle shooting right there.
Yeah.
Oh, it's 100%, 100%. And the thing
angle
is,
shooting to add better trees.
Well, and here's the reason why I bring up gray hat tactics is because the people who are the most pissed off and the most salty and the most hurt and the most toxic and the most wounded and the one that feels like they got the most taken away from them, they're on a vendetta and they want to dig in and commit a lot of time and effort and energy to messing things up for other people. So they are going to be the ones that feel great about having 14 troll accounts, right? But the person who's like, I feel totally good and I'm authentic. I don't need to lie about anything. I don't feel like I have to hide anything. That person's just gonna have one account because they're like, I don't need to prove a point, right? So you've got, you literally got like the First Order with like 14,000 like Death Star Destroyers, and you got the Rebellion with like 3 dinky shuttles that's like running out of fuel. Like you really got to be like, yo, this is the internet. Everything is free. Why are you not stepping up your game and bringing the arsenal?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm doing this call to action for action item number 2. If you want the community to be a better place, make 14 unicorn accounts. We'll just call them, trolls versus unicorns. Make 14 unicorn accounts, Pegasus accounts. Get on there and just spread the love. And be
Unicorn
good to each other.
versus trolls has now been trademarked by us.
Help people. Yeah, and help people. And my third piece of actionable advice is if you like see something, say something, right? Like there's like silence is so damning. This whole silence thing is so damning. If like, and it takes a lot of courage again to like be like, you know what? F that. I totally disagree. That person's a jerk. That's horrible, and offer support. And like that's really hard to do. And it's just like, it takes cultivation. It takes practice. It doesn't take a lot of practice to be toxic. And that's why there's a lot. That's the easy way out. Right. And that's why being a hero and having courage and doing the right thing are often very difficult to do.
That's our show. The show can be found on Twitter at GoblinLorePod, or you can email us any questions, comments, or concerns at goblinlorepodcast@gmail.com. Sam Tang can be found on Twitter at SamoTango, and his podcast, The Kitchen Table Magic Podcast, can be found on Twitter at KTM Podcast. Joe Redeman can be found on Twitter at Findhorn, that's FYND Horn. Hobbs Q can be found at Hobbs Q, and Alex Newman can be found at Alexander New M. Goblin Lore is a member of the Geek Therapy Network. Geek Therapy celebrates how geek culture can save the world through podcasts, videos, blog posts, community outreach, education, and convention appearances. It's a network of like-minded creators who believe that all different facets of nerd culture are important to understanding how our minds and communities work. Check them out at geektherapy.com or at geektherapy on Twitter. Thank you all for listening, and remember, goblins, like snowflakes, are only dangerous in numbers.